Chapter 8. Come Monday, Kelly and Daniel headed up to Venice Elementary. They met with the principal and they went to the first of the 6th grade classes. As this was their first time doing this little show, it was decided they'd try it out on the older kids first. After all, they were more likely to pay attention and understand everything in the show. They stepped into the classroom and Kelly smiled. It was your typical grade school room, small tables and chairs, racks of books, and the big blackboard on the wall behind the teacher's desk. The kids gathered around them as their teacher, a plump, pleasant woman, stepped forward. She shook each of their hands and then led them up to the head of the classroom. "Here, you can use any part of this area," she told them. Kelly nodded. "This is fine, I'll stand here, and Daniel will kind of move around in front." "Splendid," she said. "All right, children, to your seats, and we'll see this little show about hurricanes, all right?" The children were very enthusiastic and got to their seats as fast as they could. Meanwhile, Daniel set his bags next to the teacher's desk and started to get out his costume and props. He put on a big donut-shaped costume, what Daniel called Harry Hurricane, and then he set up the little toy village of homes, boats, and trees. Kelly started with the presentation, and Daniel followed along, acting out the destruction in a fun and playful manner. Yeah, this was perfect. The kids were enthralled and entertained, yet they were also learning about the dangers of hurricanes and what they needed to know to be safe. Once they were done, Daniel had gotten a big glass of water. The whole class thanked them, and then the teacher showed them off. Standing outside the door, she shook both of their hands. "That was delightful, Mr. Mayhew. You relate so well to children. I'm surprised you're not a grade school teacher." His face took on a slightly pinkish hue as he seemed lost for words. "Not Daniel, he's going to be teaching at the college," Kelly said. The teacher thanked them again and promised to give a good report to the principal. Daniel grinned. "So I guess that means we get the gig." She laughed. "Most certainly. If you have time today, we might be able to slip you into some of the lower classes, after you've done with all the 6th graders. Kelly looked at Daniel. "You up for it?" "Sure. Just keep the water coming," he replied. "Honestly, I feel like I've been digging ditches all day, and it's not even noon." "That's what John says about the theatre," Kelly said. "Working on a musical is just about as physically demanding as manual labour." The teacher smiled. "Oh, I think we can keep you well stocked with water bottles. Head back to the office and we'll direct you to the next class, okay?" They nodded, parted company, and she headed back into her classroom. They walked to the office and then headed out to the next class. The reception there was as good as the first one, and that set the pattern for the entire day. By the time they were finished, they'd visited every grade except the kindergarteners. Little Jessica positively beamed to see Daniel come to her classroom. Afterward, Daniel was positively famished, so Kelly took him to dinner at the local pizza parlour. He just about inhaled an entire pizza on his own. "So Daniel, this was a great day. I'm glad we did this together." "Me too. You like fairs?" "Sure," Kelly said, a big smile on her face. "This weekend is the county fair over at Fawcett Memorial Hospital. You want to go?" "I'd love to. Hey, you know what? We should just ask about doing our show at a fair." Daniel slowly shook his head. "I don't think we can get in on this one." "Oh no, I didn't mean this one. I was thinking of the future." "Ah, now that works for me." "Hey, speaking of work, you all set to start your classes?" Kelly asked. "Yeah, right after the Christmas holiday. I just hope the holidays go okay." "Why wouldn't they?" "Oh, my family," Daniel replied. "They seem to have a gift for messing up family gatherings. It never fails. Someone always has to say the wrong thing." Kelly laughed. "Ha, and I thought my family was the only one to do that regularly." Daniel's brow wrinkled. "How is that possible? They're witnesses. They don't observe any holidays." "Oh, trust me, they find ways to screw even a simple Sunday dinner up. Anyway, enough with the negative. Let's think about the good things to come." "Good idea," Daniel said. "If you'll pardon me, I'm going to go Christmas shopping for my friends and family now." They parted company after that. Mr. Smith sat in his car with the windows open and casually read his latest printouts. He would never understand these Americans. They settle in an area with a hot climate and then make no effort to adjust it. No, they try to bend the environment to their will. Such fools. Still, so long as they were foolish enough to put themselves in harm's way, it meant profits for Croesus and the others. Smith reached up and adjusted his rear-view mirror just a bit. There, off in the distance, was that same blue Ford Mustang. Ah, these Americans and their muscle cars. "Yo, Pop, how you doing?" came a voice. Smith turned his attention forward. Excellent, Mr. Mayhew's other sons were arriving. The email Smith had sent to them clearly had the desired effect. Once again, these Americans are so predictable. They cared nothing about honouring their elders, in this case their own father. Oh, but threatened their money, and they snapped to attention. Checking the mirror again, Smith snorted. So long as General Lowe's minion did nothing more than follow him, he would leave him alone. Besides, no sense tipping his hand too soon. So long as the man thought Smith didn't know he was there, he'd continue to make mistakes. Out in front of the house, Philip and Patrick Mayhew were making their way into the house. Smith checked his watch. Now, if Daniel followed his expected schedule, he'd be coming by right about now. Smith turned around in his seat and looked down the street. He didn't have to wait long. Daniel's old veggie car was soon coming into view. Smith frowned. He made a mental note. Need to, what was that phrase? Throw a monkey wrench in the works? A car running on alternative fuels could not be allowed. Turning the key, Smith started his car and drove off. Oh, would he love to be a fly on the wall once Daniel went into his father's house? Oh well, he'd have to get by just listening in on the bugs he'd planted in there. Daniel bounded out of his car almost before it came to a full stop. He didn't even feel the pavement beneath his feet. This was such a great day, he felt light as a feather. Throwing open the front door, he stepped inside the house. "Pop, what a day I've had!" He stopped short. Pop was sitting on the couch, flanked by Phil and Patrick. It had been a long time since he'd seen them, and it looked as if the years had not been kind to Philip. Like Pop, he tended to indulge in alcohol a bit too much. In his case, beer, so he had quite the beer belly. Also, his body just seemed to be so out of proportion. While tall, most of his height was in his legs, his chest was almost shrunken, and his arms almost unnaturally long. Daniel remembered how the kids used to make fun of Phil. He was called Neanderthal Man. Patrick, on the other hand, was entering middle age, with quiet dignity. He was the shrimp of the family, just a hair under 6 feet, short for a Mayhew man, but quite the dashing-looking fellow. His jet-black hair had just a hint of grey at the temples, and his face had a few laugh lines. He was not a man to often worry, yet he did not look happy today. "Phil, Pat, how you doing?" Daniel said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "What's that supposed to mean?" Phil snapped. Daniel sighed. Oh, it was going to be one of those kinds of visits. Phil could be so unpleasant, and for no reason other than to be contradictory. If Daniel said the sun rose in the east, Phil would say the west, just to disagree. "I was just asking how you both were. After all, it's been a while since I've seen you." "Oh, you're saying we don't visit Pop often enough, is that it?" Phil shot back. "Boys, please, let's stick to the matter at hand," Alex said. Daniel chewed his lip. Pop actually sounded completely sober. Maybe he'd be reasonable today. Patrick stepped forward and gave Daniel a little nod. "Daniel, we need to talk about Pop's money." "Yeah, and you stealing it," Phil added. "I see that's what's truly brought you here, concern about your future inheritance," Daniel replied. "Never you mind our motivation," Phil growled, almost spitting. "Enough," Alex shouted, rising to his feet. "Daniel, I know what this project of yours is really all about." Daniel's brow wrinkled. "Yeah, saving people." "Oh, Daniel, be honest for once," Patrick said. "What do you mean, for once? When have I not been honest about everything?" "Son, this is about your mother, isn't it?" "Pop, not everything I do is because of her. Yes, I love her dearly. And yes, this system will prevent such needless deaths as hers, but I didn't create the Sub-Zero system to honour her or something." "Oh, really? Why else would you steal Pop's money?" Phil said with a sneer. Alex held up a hand. "Phil, enough about that." Reaching to the coffee table, he picked up a file. "Daniel, there is no Sub-Zero thing, and you know it." Now Daniel's brow really got wrinkled. He took the file and opened it. His jaw dropped as he looked at the pictures and papers inside. "Pop, where did this stuff come from?" "The bank examiner who came to see me. You see, he got copies of all your receipts and pictures of your meetings. Frankly, I think a statue is a wonderful tribute to your mother, but—" "Pop, this is all lies," Daniel said quickly. "These papers are fake, and these pictures are, I'd say, done with Photoshop. I mean, that's me, but I was never at that place. I think that picture was taken down at Lemon Bay Marina." "Daniel, it's all there," Alex said. "Why do you continue to pretend? Now, I'm willing to work out a way for you to pay this back, but at least be honest about what you've been doing." "Pop, I'm not." "Daniel, pictures don't lie," Phil snapped. "Since when? Have you seen that crap in the tabloids?" Daniel said. "Please, everyone, let's stay civil," Pat said. "Pop, why don't you believe me? Your own son," Daniel said, pain in his voice. "And just who is this bank examiner anyway? He sure seems to be doing an awful lot of snooping." Phil snorted. "So typical of you, Daniel, trying to shift the focus." "Daniel, if you can't be honest with me, then this is the end," Alex said. "I want you out of my house. Today." "And he, wants the money back. Today," Phil said, his tone very gloating. Daniel ground his teeth and took a deep breath. "Phil, I do not answer to you. I will take care of the money I owe Pop." Phil opened his mouth, clearly intent on heightening the argument, but Alex held up a hand to cut him off. That was one of Pop's oldest gestures. Everyone in the family knew when he did that, debate was ended. Marching into his room, Daniel tossed a few things into a bag, closed his laptop and stowed it in his carrying case. After that, he got the pictures off his old dresser and gently set them in the top of his bag. Stepping out into the living room, he was not surprised to see that Phil and Pat were gone. "Already on their way home?" he asked. Alex nodded. "Yes, they're very busy." Daniel snorted. "Figures now that the deed is done, they have no time to just visit." "Daniel, leave it alone. They've got other things in their lives to be concerned with." "Yeah, and those things do not include you, me, or Gabby. All right, Pop, I'm going." "Daniel, your mother is forever in my heart, son, but you have to learn to put the past in the past and let it go." Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but just couldn't. There was no sense arguing at this point. Pop's mind was made up, and there was no convincing him of the truth. Yet he still wondered about those papers and pictures. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to frame him. Why? His first thought was Phil. He was a greedy bastard who'd always resented Daniel for coming along and taking his place as the youngest. But he wasn't too technologically inclined. Could he really have done all that by himself? Well, it didn't matter. One phase of Daniel's life had just ended, and it was time to move on to the next. Stepping outside, he gently closed the door behind him. He didn't want Pop's last memory of him to be leaving in a huff. What a way to start the holidays. Christmas Eve saw Daniel entering in his new apartment. He'd found a nice little place in North Port, just north of Port Charlotte. That was well within his means. While a simple studio apartment, it suited his needs, and he even managed to string a few decorations around the room. More importantly, he set up the old manger that his mother had given him. The apartment had a small bay window right next to the front door, and he lovingly set it up right there. The manger was small and made with a simple bit of wood, and the straw glued to the floor was nearly all gone. He didn't mind. Gently, he lifted each ceramic piece from the box, pulled away the old yellow newspaper around it, gave each a caress, and then set them next to the manger. One of the shepherds was missing an arm, an angel a wing, and a camel was held together with tape and Elmer's glue. When he was done, he sat back on the floor and just looked at it. Yeah, this was going to be a good Christmas, even if he was alone. A knock came to the door, and he got to his feet to answer it. Outside were Gabby and Kelly. Daniel felt his heart give a flutter. "Ladies, good to see you," he said, gesturing for them to enter. They did so, their arms laden with food and gifts. Together, they set them on the tiny kitchen counter, and then Daniel poured them all eggnog. The place being small and simple, Daniel sat on the bed, Gabby on the floor, right next to Daniel's Christmas palm tree, and Kelly in one of the chairs to the little dinette. "So, big bro, are you happy here?" "Sure, it's a fine place, and it's very convenient for me to get to the college." Kelly tugged on her hair. "So have you seen your dad lately?" "No," Daniel said sharply. "Big bro, we need to talk. I know you don't want me to get involved with your troubles, but—" Daniel chewed his lip. "Gabby, what have you done?" "I talked to Pop. I came to your defense and told him that he should believe you," Gabriella said. "So noble of you, little sis, but also unnecessary," Daniel replied. "I put the money back in his account, so the matter is settled." "Oh, did Tony help you?" Kelly asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, the funding came through on the stage 1 of the Sub-Zero program, so I made an online transfer, and we're square." Gabby just about beamed with joy. "Great, then you can move out of this little box and go home." "No, I can never do that, Gabby, and you know it. Pop and I are through." "But why, if the money's taken care of?" "Because Pop refuses to believe me about what I'm trying to do. To him, I'll always be a failure and obsessed with Mum. He'd rather believe that I was trying to do some sort of tribute to her instead of believing that I was working on something of substance." Gabby sighed. "Yes, I can see your point. Okay then, I'll cut him off too." "No," Daniel said sharply. "Gabby, Pop needs someone to look in on him regularly. But you think Phil and Pat give a care about him? Their only concern is that Pop's going to live too long and spend their inheritance." "Daniel, that's a bit much, don't you think?" Kelly replied. Gabby slowly shook her head. "No, unfortunately, he's right about our brothers." "Yeah, especially Phil. He's a big Star Trek fan, and he really identifies with the Ferengi. For him, it's all about profit. He doesn't appreciate pieces of art. He appraises them." "Also unfortunately true," Gabby said. Daniel's gaze lifted to the manger, and he became lost in thought. His mind journeyed back to Christmases of long ago. He remembered one, a special one. He couldn't have been more than, 4? He was still in those little footy pyjamas, and his mother had tucked him into bed on Christmas Eve. Then she pulled out her copy of A Visit from St. Nicholas and read it to him. After that came the special story, the one from her homeland of Italy. She told him the Christmas tradition that had been handed down to her. In her country, they had no Santa Claus, something Daniel found quite mysterious. Instead, there was the story of the old woman and the 3 wise men. Many centuries ago, the Magi stopped at the home of an elderly lady and asked her to journey with them to see the Christ child. The woman didn't want to leave her nice, cozy home. Some years later, she wondered about the child and finally decided that each year on his birthday, she would go from house to house and look in every child's bed. Gazing at the child, she would ask, "Is this the Christ child?" and then shed a tear when no answer came. After that, she'd leave a small gift and then move on to the next home. Daniel had found the story so touching he begged her to tell it each Christmas Eve, and thus was born their special tradition. Phil and Pat weren't interested in such things. They were a lot older, and Gabby wasn't around yet. No, this was a special thing that Daniel and his mother shared. That and the manger set. It was with good reason that he'd taken the set when she died. Once again, the others showed no interest in it. Pop saw no need for it, and Gabby knew what it meant to Daniel. As for the boys, it was a pile of junk, as far as they were concerned. Daniel felt a huge dull ache deep in his gut. If he didn't know better, he'd think he had some sort of broken bone in there. Yeah, he well remembered that pain too. He'd been 8 when he'd been out playing and had fallen over backward. Throwing out his arms to break his fall, he'd felt this sharp, stinging pain ripple through his right wrist. Of course, being a boy, he was determined not to cry in front of his friends. That lasted all of about 10 seconds, and then he burst into tears and raced for home. It's said that mother animals know their offspring by their cry, while Daniel was sure humans were the same way. That day, it had been Mum who had taken care of him. She was out of the door and their house, and caught up with him long before he reached the place. Bundling him into the car, she got him to the doctor. It was a broken wrist, and he needed a cast on it. Then, afterward, she sat up with him all night, caring for him and giving him his pills. Well, the pain he was feeling right now was just like that, only worse. He found it funny. That time just had not dimmed the pain to his soul. It was back in Sunday school that the teacher had told them that the soul, a gift from God, was infinite. After all, the mind, the brain, was a finite thing. So how could something so simple be able to understand the infinite? No, only the soul, a spirit that spanned the universe, could possibly comprehend the infinite. Right now, the pains coursing through Daniel's insides truly felt as if it were reaching to the depths of his soul because it seemed to go on and on forever. He had to wonder, would it ever pass? A tap on his knee brought him back to reality. Looking down, he saw Gabby's sweet little face smiling up at him. "Hey, where were you just now?" "Just lost in some memories," he said softly. "Clearly not very good ones," she said. Daniel wiped his cheek. "Why do you say that? Those tears sort of communicate that." "Oh, that's not always true," Daniel replied. "After all, there's such a thing as tears of joy." "So what were you thinking about?" Kelly said. "Just my mother." Gabriella took Daniel's hands in her little hands and gave him the warmest smile. "Daniel, it's okay to miss her and think of her, but you shouldn't feel guilty about her or obsess over her." "Now that's unfair," he replied. "Okay, yes, I do think of her often, with good reason, but Sub-Zero is not about her. Well, not just about her." Kelly nodded. "Good, Daniel. That's what's most important. We just want to be sure you're focused on this work for the right reasons and not so wrapped up in your memories of Mum that you get stuck in the past. If you can't move on, you'll never be happy. Gabby, don't worry. I think this break with Pop has done me some good. It's helped me put things in perspective." "Then will you go to him and patch things up?" Gabriella said. "Not now," Daniel replied. "The wounds are too fresh. Give me time to deal with things, and then we'll see. For now, let's just try to have a nice Christmas among ourselves, okay?" Gabby sighed. "Okay, big bro, I guess that's reasonable." Kelly pointed at the window and stood up. "Hey, check it out." Daniel looked up and Gabriella turned around. It was snowing. He stood up and crossed to the window. Outside, bundled up in winter coats, were some people. Daniel opened the door and stepped out into the entryway. He smiled. There stood Fabio and Ronald, and Tony was off to the side. He had a basket full of stage snow and was lobbing handfuls of it into the air to create the snowing effect. At the same time, the boys were singing Christmas carols, very badly. Okay, enough guys," Daniel said. "Cut it out before my neighbours accuse me of torturing cats or something." The ladies came up behind him, and the three of them laughed as the guys stopped and stepped closer. "Hey, it's not our fault we stink," Tony said. "You ever try to sing in a sauna?" "Huh?" Gabby said. Ronald opened his coat. It was clear that he'd been sweating quite a bit. "It may be Christmas Eve, but this is still Florida," he said. Fabio nodded as he pulled his coat off. "Yeah, feels like 90 to 100 degrees in these things. But we wanted to give Daniel's new place a proper baptism. You like?" Daniel smiled and gestured for them to come in. "Guys, it's perfect. Here, come on in and get out of the heat. I'll crank up the AC and we'll pop the Roaring Fire DVD into the player." With that, they all went inside and shared a bit of Christmas cheer. "Daniel, you do promise to patch things up with Pop, right?" Gabby said, her voice low. He nodded. "Yes, little sis, not to worry. I'll work things out."